Okay, so we're talking about putting objects into perspective, finding the perspective in objects, constructing and deconstructing, build up and break down, right? So the issue becomes, okay, when I'm looking at objects, how do I find what is the perspective the objects are in? And you're doing a good job here with these boots already. A previous example of the boot that I drew had one boot pretty easy because we have this nice clue right at the top here in the form of this oval, and we can also actually see the square shape at the bottom, giving us a good indication of what the planes might be. Here you have the same thing in this front boot, and you do a great job. But if we break that down and we look at why this is working so well, this can help us find this other troublesome boot in the background. We're going to go through a couple of ways to troubleshoot this idea. So number one, let's go ahead and give ourselves an actual rectangle, an actual brick to work inside of, right? So we're going to create a brick that the shoe can live inside of. And as we can see, the skill set of learning to manipulate a simple brick becomes more and more important. A simple cube or brick shape becomes more and more important, right? So, and again, we can approximate here. An approximate brick is just fine. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. I am thinking a little bit about these angles of these lines here. Okay, so this is our brick cube, whatever, right? And our shoe is inside of it. This looks pretty good. This looks like this shoe is inside of this box. Now, how do I relate this shoe to this box more closely? Well, we'll go back to what we talked about in the second video. For a moment, forget about the whole box and just think about the box, the one flat side of the box, just for a moment, right? So we're going to look at this lower plane of this box right here. And why am I choosing this side to look at? The truth is you can look at any side, right? Because each side represents a side of the boot. But we're going to look at the bottom plane right there because that bottom plane, we can put the sole of the boot right on that bottom plane, which we're going to do right now, right? So if I was to take this box right here and I was to flip it over on its side like that, and then turn it so that we're only seeing the bottom. So all we're seeing is this box turned on its side right here, right? And we can magically see the boot through the box, and we're going to see something like this. The flat face of the boot is going to be on the bottom of this box like so, right? So this is important because when we think of this box in 3D and in 2D, and we put the sole of this shoe on the box, we can now still imagine this box in 3D perspective if we want to from this angle. But we can also turn this box now, just thinking about the bottom part. So let's turn this box to the side. We're going to just turn it this way, right? And again, we're approximating here. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Okay, and remember, we're only thinking about this one side, right? This one face is what we're looking at. I'll shade it in one more time. Just so we're absolutely sure which side we're looking at. Okay, so this is the same face, right? This gray face that we've picked out. And so now, if I were to draw that sole of that shoe, I'm trying to keep this mostly 2D, but we do know that there's a heel there. So I want to acknowledge that heel a little bit. But same thing, right? Like, so if we're thinking of just the flatness of this box and cutting this heel shape out, thinking of this heel shape flat, you can see how we can manipulate the shoe by simplifying the idea, right? It's very difficult. It can be difficult when you look at the whole shape and there's curves and twists and turns and bends and so on and so forth. But when you look at the flatness of the bottom plane here, and obviously, again, we acknowledge that this would be a little bit of three-dimensionality with this curving upward, but we're simplifying for the sake of the example, right? Now you can see that boot continued like so, right? And this solves the problem of the boot in the background. Because if we take this plane of the boot in the background, right, and we outline, let's get a new layer, and we outline this boot in the background, and again, this subtle curve that's on this boot in the background, this subtle 3D element, we're kind of ignoring that for right now, while we're working our way through this thought process, because we know we can come back and add those features before. We talked about the difference between main structure and flourishes, right? You can think of that three-dimensionality right now as a flourish that you can bring in later. The main idea is that this boot has a flat sole that is on the ground. And if I were to now reverse the process of taking that flat sole and putting it onto that sheet of paper, which then can become our box, now we can start to get to a situation where we go, okay, well, if I'm looking at this sheet of paper, am I seeing either of the sides of these faces of this box? No, I'm not. So this shoe is actually in kind of a one-point perspective relative to this same horizon line, right? And our box will approximately be something like about here, maybe, is how we would do that. And, you know, and then the shoe would follow those basic rules, and you can see it all coming together very quickly, very easily. So if I was to talk about this in steps, it would be step one, obviously find whichever corners and planes you can to find your key lines, right? And once you find these kind of early lines that determine where your perspective probably will be, then go ahead and simplify that shape. And think of cutting that out on that one plane, right? You think of cutting this heel out on this one plane. Think of it nice and flat, right? Because it's basically, and this is why we talk about it's so important to draw boxes or cubes in perspective and be able to cut shapes into these boxes, whatever shape you want. So let's say, thinking of something off the top of my head, before I use a couch, that's a good example because the couch kind of just cuts right into the side like so, right? And you can cut into the side of that, understanding that whatever perspective this box is in, the couch is going to have to obey those rules, right? More of a love seat here, but you guys get the idea. You know, and this is going to work for anything, even say a human head, right? You can still simplify the side of a human head. And we've got extensive lessons on how to do a nice, solid, realistic human head. But even for now, if we were to say, okay, well, this is the 2D representation of this human head, and we'll use the same kind of box, use that in 3D, you can still get started on the basic angle of what that looks like, but then you bring in the actual shapes of the head, right? Those actual skull shapes, and you adjust accordingly. And you can start to see, and the same, but it's obeying the same rules, right? These lower curves are curving under, as if we had the low cylinder here. As they get towards the top, they get more shallow, right? As they get closer to the horizon line, those same things will happen as you bring in those 3D elements to those shapes. So the ability to construct an object and deconstruct an object and go back and forth between the two is what allows you to continually find perspective. So to review, go ahead and find one side that you can rely on, that you can definitely see, attach that side to one surface of your box, and then simplify that. Think of that box as a sheet for a moment, so you can really focus on that one face and then find the rest of the perspective after that moment, especially for difficult objects like this. It all comes down to thinking of that sheet and what is the shape that's being cut out of that sheet. It doesn't matter what the shape is, because once you put it on that sheet in a two-dimensional plane, you can extend that into a three-dimensional shape of any kind, and it's definitely going to work for you. So hopefully that helps. I'll see you all in the next one.